911, what is your emergency?
I woke up on my boyfriend. He was outside this morning. He's cold. He's cold.
I was scared and I was confused. I was on the phone with 911.
The kitchen's a bloody mess. He's not breathing.
Why is the kitchen a bloody mess?
I don't know.
What's your name?
No. Melissa Turner.
I couldn't remember a lot. When I realized that he wasn't responding, I panicked.
When did you realize that Matthew was dead?
I think a part of me already knew.
Copy, I'm in road therapy.
October 18th, 2019, we got the call that we had to respond here. Matthew Trussler was found in the patio pool area of this residence.
And what kind of shape was Melissa at that time?
I remember seeing her pretty well covered in blood.
So on that night, what happens?
Matt had gotten upset. He had gotten his knife out, I remember. He would act more like he was possessed. He would say things to me like, Matt's not here anymore, I'm the demon. There were times where he would try and use it on himself.
I was the prosecutor who went to the crime scene that day. I thought it was bizarre. There was the insinuation that he had done this to himself, and he had a stab wound in the back. He couldn't have done that to himself, right?
He fell his back. I tried giving him CPR. I tried.
I just thought that there was a lot of acting happening, where she's dialing 911 and make herself cry.
I don't know what happened.
It was exceptional acting.
Fantastic actress. She wanted to be in movies.
A cosplay model is basically where you dress up as like your favorite characters. I would do Elvira, Misty from Pokemon. I really loved the makeup and the props and the costuming.
I am Two-Thorn Rose. I'm a cam model, I'm an artist, I love fitness.
Her content was sexual based.
She had websites. She had an OnlyFans page. We were very shocked to find this kind of secretive life that we didn't know about.
Who do you believe killed Matthew Trussler?
Melissa Turner.
I didn't do what they're saying. I did. If I'm going to prison, then I'm going down fighting. I'm going down telling my side of the story.
Westchester County Fire Rescue. What's the address of the emergency? And tell me what's wrong.
He is non-responsive.
I couldn't stop crying.
Melissa Turner can vividly describe the moment as medics tried to revive her fiancé, Matthew Trussler.
I watched the EMTs unfold the sheet and lay the white sheet over him.
2 years later, Melissa still struggles to talk about the day Matthew died.
And it was when that happened that I couldn't hold in the tears and everything.
It was around 8:30 a.m. when Melissa says she found Matthew unresponsive on the back patio of the house they shared in a suburb of Tampa, Florida.
I tried to see if he was breathing, and I tried to start CPR.
Just a couple hours later, still covered in blood, Melissa agreed to talk to investigators at the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. She says she wanted to help them figure out what had happened to Matthew.
I was just saying yes and complying with whatever was kind of said or told to me. The world around me didn't really feel real in those moments.
A lot less glamorous than they make it on TV.
Melissa told the detectives the couple's day had started off just like any other. They took care of their pets, did house chores, as seen in these previously posted Facebook videos.
Get up. We gotta clean that spot.
And went grocery shopping. She admitted they were also drinking alcohol throughout the day, leading into the evening.
I mean, that's what we did. We were there at the house ourselves. We had drinks. He always liked drinking. He was a drinker.
According to Melissa, around 11 p.m., she got tired and told Matthew she wanted to go to sleep. He was still up.
I slept on that big chair that's in my little office area downstairs.
What she saw when she woke up the next morning, Melissa told investigators, didn't make sense.
I saw the kitchen was... I didn't see him outside at first. I went upstairs and I checked the bedroom, and then I came back down again.
She says that's when she discovered Matthew outside on the patio and began CPR.
Yeah, his blood all over you.
You're
trying to do CPR and help him.
They're hard to see, but Melissa is wearing latex gloves given to her by an officer at the scene.
He had you put those on because
I
of the
was
amount of
getting
blood.
things bloody because I was covered in his blood.
Do you want to keep wearing those gloves, or do you want to take them off?
I'll leave them on for now.
Do you have any injuries on your person?
No,
Any scratches or cuts or anything?
none that I noticed.
The detectives eventually told Melissa she would need to take the gloves off.
I have a little cut in here.
And that's from what?
I think it's from grabbing the glass. Because I know there was the broken glass this morning.
So they could take photographs of her.
Open your hand a little more there. Yeah. That hurt to open it up, sorry.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know.
This slide's pretty good.
I didn't even notice.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea that was there.
As detectives worked to get to the bottom of what happened, Matthew's family was learning Matthew had died. His brother Sean got the call from their mother.
I got a call that he died in an accident. That's what they told me.
Sean called his fiancée, Jennifer, immediately.
He's sobbing so hard and just screaming at the top of his lungs. He's gone. My brother, Maddie's gone. He's dead. I'm getting chills just talking about this.
Sean and Matthew Tressler were originally from Massachusetts. In 2015, Matthew followed in his brother's footsteps and moved to Florida to work with him in the construction business. Sean, who lost one of his eyes due to a work accident shortly after his brother's death, says the two made a good team.
I have worked Matty very hard. He just needs to be led correctly.
Matthew, or Matty as Sean calls him, struggled with substance abuse and was looking at the move to Florida as a chance to start over.
He was a really good kid. He worked so hard. He had the biggest heart. He loved everybody and everything.
2 years after his move, Melissa, then 24, met Matthew, 23, on an online dating app.
We met on Tinder, and I just liked how different Matt treated me. He made me feel more important. He drew me in.
In 2019, the couple took a big step and bought a house together.
We were excited about the house. We were picking out, paint colors for walls and furniture.
But Melissa says a few months into their new lives, their relationship became strained.
Matt's drinking was getting worse. It was just becoming really excessive.
At the sheriff's office, Melissa had been adamant that there were no arguments between the couple that night.
We were having a great time.
Was there anything physical, violent?
He was never violent. He was always amazing with me.
But Melissa didn't know that the detectives had been tipped off by the responding officer that Melissa had told him there had been an argument at the house the night before.
What were you and Matthew arguing about last night?
I don't really remember. I mean, we might have gotten in an argument, but it didn't seem like anything. We're like screaming at each other that I know of.
You told us that you guys were there, there's only two of you, the two of you were drinking. My problem is I got Matthew on the back porch with stab wounds.
Stab wounds?
Meanwhile, another detective, Ryan Lagasse, was knocking on doors and canvassing the neighborhood for clues.
As I walked over here, you've got the camera located directly above the residence across the street here.
And what was captured by this camera, police say, would prove Melissa knew more than she was letting on. An eyewitness can be crucial to solving a crime. And just hours into the investigation of Matthew Trussler's death, detectives discovered digital observers. There was an ADT camera inside the couple's home, but at first glance, it didn't appear to show any unusual activity.
Most of our information came from that camera that's posted up above the garage.
It was this Nest camera on a neighbor's garage that would prove invaluable. An unblinking eye trained on the side of Melissa and Matthew's home that recorded sights and sounds.
So I started looking at the footage.
Lagasse, a detective for the sheriff's office at the time, saw only darkness and heard the near silence of suburbia until around 4 a.m.
I started to hear racketing, things that sounded like they were crashing. And so then I kind of zoomed in my senses a little bit. And then from there, I started hearing voices. And then I hear what sounds like screaming, yelling.
Lagasse says those voices were coming from Matthew and Melissa's house. How would you describe the tone of the voices that you heard?
So the little bit of male voice was tough to distinguish, but the female voice was very, very loud, sounded very angry.
What could you hear? What kind of phrases?
So I heard, get up. I heard so, and then there was an explicit die.
You heard so die?
And then I heard, it sounded like a female voice was crying, saying, what did I do?
Lagasse immediately reached out to his colleagues who were interviewing Melissa.
You said that last night you never woke up at all.
No, I remember laying down and I remember waking up in the same spot.
Investigators now believe they had evidence that Melissa wasn't telling all she knew.
Tell me about what happened around 4 o'clock this morning.
4 o'clock? What happened at 4 o'clock?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking you.
I don't know either. Why?
Was there any arguing
At 4 o'clock? Not that I know of. I believe I was asleep. I have no memory of any argument at 4 in the morning.
But after detectives confronted her with the evidence, Melissa's story changed.
I have some video surveillance actually yelling and screaming between a male and a female coming from your house.
What we need from you that would probably make a lot more sense is to tell us what that argument was about.
I would say he woke me up and we got in an argument over that because he was still up at 4 in the morning drinking.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, you do have a memory of what happened, right?
Yes.
At 4 o'clock.
Yes.
Why were you yelling at him, bitch, get up, bitch, get up?
Actually, a lot of the times whenever he is drinking and gets that drunk into the hours of the morning, he will just fall over.
You also said a couple of other things like, stay down. So die. What are you talking about?
That was me being pissed off at him that he fell over.
You got a slice on your hand. A slice. That's what that is. How did that happen?
The investigators again focused on that cut on Melissa's hand.
It's not from glass. I can tell you that.
Once again, her story changed.
He does get his knives out sometimes. He wasn't him anymore. Thinking back on it, this is from me grabbing a knife out of his hand. And then things kind of escalated from there.
Melissa later told us she wasn't trying to hide the injury on her hand. In fact, she had mentioned it earlier to the 911 operator.
I have a cut on my hand.
I barely remembered, even after mentioning it on the 911 call, that my hand was sliced open.
911.
A few hours after Melissa placed that 911 call, she was arrested and charged with second-degree murder with a weapon. Sean and Jennifer learned Melissa was in custody for Matthew's murder from his mom, who called Melissa by her middle name, Rose.
She said, Rose killed him. I remember we stood in my kitchen and he just starts bawling.
Up until then, Sean and Jennifer say the couple didn't appear to have any problems, but Sean says that Melissa did put a wedge between him and Matthew.
She was totally isolated, him and her, from the rest of the world. And the truth is, like, how controlling and manipulating Rose was.
Sean says he hadn't seen Matthew during the last 6 months of his life. The brothers had had a falling out after Matthew stopped working with Sean at his construction business.
She took Maddie long before she took him forever.
Sean and Jennifer say Melissa had two sides, as Matthew's live-in partner and as a cosplay model who dressed up in costume, portraying famous fictional characters. What is that, then?
That is actually from
Scooby-Doo.
She made a living by producing and acting in her own adult videos.
But it's from a movie clip where she actually is performing sexual acts.
And it wasn't until after his death that they learned Melissa had cast Matthew as her partner in her videos.
And I really feel like the pressure and the stress and the fact that it was more and more and more just paid its toll on him.
You think that maybe he just didn't want to do those films anymore?
Absolutely.
I think he was done with her.
After Sean and his fiancée Jennifer found out that Melissa had been arrested for Matthew's murder, they began an investigation of their own.
We came across things that were pretty disturbing.
Sean and Jennifer believe Matthew was becoming disenchanted with his role in those videos Melissa produced.
I think at first it was okay because he was seeing some fruits from his labor.
Money.
But I think it got a little much.
They now wonder if Melissa had been looking for a partner for her videos when she spotted Matthew on that dating app.
People write little bios about themselves.
She went out and found someone with all the right stuff, the looks, the body, and everything that goes with it.
She doesn't do things without a bunch of research.
Cameron Walega, a former boyfriend of Melissa, met her before she began her career in the world of adult entertainment.
She was very artistic, so she was able to edit her own videos, edit her own pictures, very business-driven.
The two met in 2012 when they were studying makeup effects at Douglas Education Center near Pittsburgh. Back then, Melissa was running a popular fitness blog after losing 100 pounds, later documenting her transformation on social media.
It kept her accountable. She had this audience that was incredibly invested in what she was doing and watching her evolve as a person.
In 2013, Cameron and Melissa moved to Florida to pursue careers in special effects. There, Melissa confessed to Cameron that she had started a second blog with racier content.
This was meant to be temporary. This was supplemental.
But Cameron says Melissa soon began earning a decent living doing what is called cam work, where she performed in various stages of dress for her internet followers who paid a fee.
She was so proud of where she got herself. I used to be this incredibly insecure girl. Now they're paying me to look at me.
He says he began to see a change in Melissa's personality as her business grew.
But it came maniacal to a point where it was a complete obsession. And it was money, 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 money. And the more and more success that she found, the more and more unstable she became. She would scream at times that it would pierce your ear. There were times where she was just unpredictable, absolutely unpredictable.
Sean and Jennifer now wonder if Melissa's volatility may have escalated an argument with Matthew on the night he died. Did he want out of the adult entertainment business?
I think like maybe that night he was like, yo, I'm done with this. I'm washing my hands.
She didn't like whatever he said to her, and it made her blow her top.
But that's not how it happened, says Melissa.
After he was upset with me for wanting to go to bed, but, I stayed downstairs. His demeanor would start to get darker and darker from there. Matt, he had his knife out. It was the black tactical switchblade. There were times where he would get really upset and try and use it on himself. And so it was a common thing for me to try and take a knife away from him. On this night, he didn't want to let go of the knife.
Melissa says Matthew was drunk and despondent. They struggled over the knife, she says, but after she managed to take it away, she says Matthew grabbed her by the neck and squeezed, a detail she failed to tell detectives during her interrogation.
I thought this was it. I thought he was going to kill me, and I stabbed him lightly in the back just to get him off of me.
She says after she stabbed him once in the back, Matthew pushed her into the kitchen counter, and she hit her head.
He came at me, and that's how I fell back and hit my head. So I had a pretty severe head injury.
But that claim would later be challenged at her trial.
I remembered a few blurry steps towards my office, but that was it. I just remember passing out, blacking out there.
She's the real victim. She's the one that was suffering the abuse.
John Trevina is Melissa's attorney. He describes the couple's relationship as toxic.
Particularly since she said it was escalating. His drinking was escalating, his behavior issues were escalating, and it just unfortunately escalated into this very odd incident. I don't think it is a murder case. I think it is a case of self-defense.
But Melissa's version of events will be picked apart by prosecutors Catherine Fand and Chimway Fawcett at her trial.
There's just nothing to support her statement.
She never mentions anything about anyone strangling her or anything until days before trial. You really have to take that into consideration.
Besides the audio from the Nest Cam, the state plans to present video from inside the couple's home. Remember that ADT security footage recovered by investigators? Prosecutors believed it didn't show any suspicious activity the night of Matthew's death. But just before the trial, they discovered they misread the time and date.
I'll be honest, I misunderstood the timing. It's not recorded in Eastern Standard Time. It's recorded in Universal Time.
And what the video did capture, say prosecutors,
We're gonna show you some ADT videos.
Would undermine Melissa's defense.
He's calmly walking, and you can see she's hunched over, she's yelling, she is angry and upset.
What do you make of Melissa Turner's account? Chat now on Facebook and X.
On Valentine's Day 2022, 2 years after Matthew Trussler was found dead on his patio, his fiancée, Melissa Turner, went on trial for murder.
All right.
Melissa had been out on bail since her arrest in 2019. But if she's convicted, she knows she could spend the rest of her life behind bars.
It'll be a world of weight off my shoulders for this trial to just be over.
The jury will hear nothing about her videos, her cosplay modeling, and acting out fantasies online. The judge ruled it wasn't relevant to the case. Prosecutor Chimwe Fawcett sees it differently.
I did think that the jury should have known that she was an actress. And she was able to make herself into this victim-type person and then cry on demand.
Melissa's attorney, John Trevina, told the jury that she didn't mean to kill Matthew, that she stabbed him in self-defense during that struggle over the knife.
Who killed Matthew Trussler? Matthew Trussler killed Matthew Trussler.
He did. He did it to himself because of his actions and his behaviors. His drinking, his emotional abuse.
You're saying that Melissa had the right to kill him because he was drunk?
No, Melissa had the right to kill him to defend herself from being strangled.
But Prosecutor Fawcett says Matthew had no record or history of violence against anyone. Why do you believe that Melissa killed Matthew Trussler?
I think she was intoxicated, and I do think that she went far beyond anything she thought she would do. Maybe she was just so frustrated with his drinking that she harms him so badly that he ends up dying.
At trial, Melissa decided to take a risk and testify. She described Matthew as an alcoholic who had exhibited abusive.
There were times where he would push me and punch the walls beside my head.
And unsettling behaviors in the past.
I had seen him cut himself, burn himself, stab himself. He would stare off at some corners, and he would tell me that there's a demon standing right there. There were times where he would talk in a different voice.
Did that frighten you?
Yes. I was terrified.
And this was happening on that night?
Yeah. And he just had this little smile on his face, and he said, "What's the matter, little girl? Are you scared?" Because Matt's not here anymore.
Authorities never checked Melissa's blood alcohol level, but Matthew's was nearly 5 times the legal limit in Florida.
That level of blood alcohol not only is lethal, it can cause hallucinations, the demon that we've heard about.
But the medical examiner didn't say that he died of alcohol intoxication. The cause of death is that he was stabbed and he bled to death.
According to the medical examiner, Matthew had several small cuts and bruises and a possible defensive wound on his forearm. The fatal injury was not the stab wound to his back, but from a deep incision on his right arm, which punctured a vein.
You stabbed him in the back, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that I did was the back.
How did he get cut on his right arm?
I couldn't tell you that. I have no clue. He could have fallen into something. He could have done it himself. I stabbed him once to get him off of me from strangling me.
Why didn't you tell the police that he had been trying to strangle you?
Because I couldn't remember at the time. I complained multiple times about a headache.
Prosecutor Fawcett questioned Melissa about her memories that returned before the trial.
And so today, in 2022, you now claim you had some kind of head injury, correct?
Yes.
But a crime scene tech testified there was no evidence of a head injury.
And now, in 2022, you speak of some kind of blackout, correct? Yes?
Correct.
Okay.
The jury won't have to rely just on Melissa's memories as they weigh the evidence. There's also that video from inside the couple's home. Prosecutors say it proves Melissa was the aggressor that night. At 3:38 a.m., Melissa is seen running towards her office. At 3:42 a.m., Matthew walks past the camera. Melissa follows him.
He's walking calmly unarmed in the ADT videos, and she's following him hunched over, angry.
At 4:01 a.m., the video shows Melissa running from the direction of the kitchen. She appears distressed. This is also around the time when the camera across the street picks up audio of screaming and yelling. Then, in the next video clip at 4:08 a.m.,
she's standing at a front door and she's seeming like she's talking to open air. And you can see on her hand, you can see the hint of red, and she already has the cut.
prosecutors say the cut on her hand occurred when Melissa stabbed Matthew. They believe he was still alive at that point. Prosecutors say she could have left then for help or called 911.
That's not what she did. She walks back to where he is.
She is not in reasonable fear of him. That's what's clear.
But Melissa's attorney, John Trevina, rejects the state's timeline and disputes what prosecutors say is seen on that video.
I never saw any cut on her hand, and I don't think it shows that.
The fighting continues, say prosecutors, because around 4:30 a.m., they say the couple moved close to an open window, and that Nest camera across the street recorded a woman's angry voice.
You said 4:33 a.m., so effing die, right?
No, I have no recollection of that. I explained my side and why I did what I did.
You're crying right now. Is that what's happening? Are you crying right now?
Do you know what tears look like?
Are you crying because you can just cry on cue?
I'm crying because my life is on the line right now.
Trevina says it's impossible to clearly understand what Melissa is saying on the Nest recording. And a former FBI audio forensic expert, Bruce Koenig, testified for the defense how he believes sections of the Nest audio had been what he called volume enhanced.
So it could be that maybe one voice on the recording was not amplified, and that another voice on the recording was greatly amplified.
That's true.
I find it highly suspicious that Miss Turner's voice is screeching loud, but when it came to Matthew Trussler, you could barely hear mumbling.
Prosecutors deny the audio was manipulated. Based on the outside camera, prosecutor Fan says the confrontation ended at 5:11 a.m. when Matthew somehow got out to the pool area through this window.
So the window was actually open, but when he decided to flee from her, he pushed out the screen and went out the window.
Prosecutors say by the time Matthew collapsed by the pool, Melissa would have seen how injured he was.
He has already bled all that blood in the kitchen and then gone out.
She knows that he needs help. And she's awake, and she doesn't help him.
But Melissa says that's when she returned to her office and blacked out. The argument ends sometime around 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
But you don't call 911
911.
until 8:45.
Correct, because I was unconscious.
One of the last ADT clips shows Melissa at 8:35 a.m. walking from the direction of her office. In the police report, her hair is described as, quote, messy, as if she just woke up.
That was the most demonstrative of her not knowing he's dead, because you wouldn't go looking for him if you killed him.
Is it possible that she did pass out there? She's been drinking, whatever, and had no idea that he was dying at that time.
Well, she knew he was dying because she saw him bleeding out.
As the jury began their deliberations, one of the jurors, Donald Goodwin, was feeling the weight of his decision. How does the first vote go?
2 for guilty in the second degree.
And where were you?
Unknown.
Do you have a home security camera? And has it ever recorded something unusual? Take a look at the murder investigation at 48hours.com.
What do you hope the jury comes back with?
What everyone hopes for, not guilty.
If you have a reasonable doubt about
February 18th, 2022, Melissa Turner's murder trial wrapped up after 5 days of testimony before Judge Samantha Ward.
your duty is to determine if the defendant has been proven guilty or not in accord with the law.
Melissa's hoping the jury will believe her story about seeing Matthew alive before blacking out.
He was still up and moving around.
She says she had no idea of how badly he had been injured.
So the last I remembered of him, he was still up.
Isn't it possible that there may not have been really intent to kill anybody? It's this drunken fight and somebody ends up bleeding to death.
That's a homicide.
And prosecutor Chimwe Fawcett says this case is really about domestic violence.
He was cut and stabbed and left to die. I think that's the very definition, especially considering that this was by his fiancée.
In Florida, second-degree murder cases are heard by 6 jurors. In this case, 2 women, 4 men. One of them, Donald Goodwin.
Come on up, Turner.
And you see a young lady and you're already like, your stomach drops. You're like, Lord, just let me do the right thing. But behind the looks of a young lady, the truth was coming out quickly.
Melissa Turner, M.
When she went to the stand, I think it hurt her big time. Her tears were so fake, and you can tell.
I'm crying because I still remember all those places, all those plans.
She was super angry and super sad. Her emotions were everywhere. I'm like, that tells me that's who she is.
Goodwin, a part-time family pastor, says those security camera videos were crucial because of what he says was a lack of other evidence.
I looked at the videos over and over, the ATT videos that's inside the house. I seen red on her hands, but I couldn't use it as evidence because the camera wasn't crystal clear.
At that point, did you think he had already been stabbed?
Yes, and I think she snapped.
You don't believe he was strangling her at the time?
No, I felt like she had enough and attacked him.
And there was one clip of the audio recording that convinced Goodwin that Melissa knew Matthew was hurt.
Then she said, what did I do? And I was like, that right there tells me you know exactly what's going on now. She knew he was gonna die. She knew it, and yet she called nobody.
And as for Melissa's claims about hitting her head and blacking out,
you don't believe that she might have passed out?
No, not at all. There was no evidence of head injury.
Publish the verdict and poll the jurors, please.
The jury deliberated for 7 hours.
We, the jury, find as follows as to the charge. The defendant is guilty of murder in the second degree.
Guilty of the murder of Matthew Trussler.
I remember Sean squeezing my hand. It was a happy feeling.
She was inconsolable. I mean, it was very difficult. I mean, she was crying profusely.
She will be taken into custody at this time.
On March 18, 2022, Melissa returned to court to learn her sentence. She talked about what she had lost.
On October 18th, Matthew lost his life, and I lost a man that I loved. I lost my future and my hopes and my dreams.
But Matthew's family also spoke, struggling with both grief and anger.
Maddie, 25 years old. Wow. So much life still ahead. The life of a son, a brother, a brother-in-law, and an uncle. Sean will never see his best friend again. He will never be able to replace you.
Matthew's mother spoke directly to Melissa.
The story that you have contrived has caused me as much pain as his death. If Matthew's drinking was escalating, it was because of the lifestyle that you involved him in. It was not consistent with who he was and with the way that he was raised.
This jury did not believe her claims of self-defense, nor does this court.
Still, Judge Samantha Ward offered Melissa some mercy, sparing her a life sentence.
Based on the jury's verdict, you are adjudicated guilty, sentenced to 20.5 years in the Florida State Prison.
Melissa Turner will be eligible for release before she turns 50.
What do you guys miss about Maddie the most?
Oh my gosh.
Laugh, probably.
He had a great laugh.
He was a good kid. He was. He was just starting to be a man.
One life lost, another ruined on a night juror Goodwin says didn't have to happen.
Matthew Trussler didn't have to die. They could have walked away from each other and started a different life. Melissa Turner chose to kill Matthew Trussler. Did I think it was premeditated? Absolutely not. Do I think she's guilty? Absolutely.
A knock at the door by a clown, an evil clown.
The evil clowns you see in the
It's like ghosts. You just see the ghosts of them everywhere.
If you close your eyes, can you still see it?
All of it.
The focus of the case is Michelle Renee. She was living with her daughter, Breea. They were living in a kind of a secluded house.
Does it feel like 22 years?
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like it was last week.
I asked the FBI to take Michelle back to the house to help reconstruct probably the most traumatic night of her life.
We came in the door. I put the groceries away, went in the kitchen.
Michelle was a single mom. She was a bank manager, somebody who worked hard to gain a job of position of trust and respect.
It had been such a long day, and I was just excited to be home with Breea. We were on the couch. It was just the two of us.
I was sitting here, she was right beside me, and we were playing Game Boy.
A group of individuals put Michelle under surveillance knowing she was a bank manager, and they devised a plan.
And we just heard this huge, the sound, just the biggest noise from behind us. And I turned to look and just saw 3 people. They were all lined up, one right after the other, just rushing in, running in the door, that like SWAT style, and they had their guns and they were all in black. And I just screamed super loud. My daughter screamed super loud. At that point, my daughter took off this way, but 2 of them came to me, put guns in my face. One guy grabbed me back of my head, forced me down in front of the couch that was right here.
They bind her up with duct tape. They put her 7-year-old on the ground and bind her up with duct tape. And they tell them that if they don't cooperate, they're gonna be killed, they're gonna be shot.
They let me turn around and see my daughter laying face down on the floor right here by the door, face down with her hands tied and her feet tied. Right there on the ground, I heard my daughter say, "Are you gonna kill my mommy? And are you gonna kill me?" And they said, "No, not if your mommy does everything that we tell her to do."
They said, you're gonna rob the bank for us, or we will kill you, and your daughter will be first.
The only monsters that had ever scared Michelle Renee's 7-year-old daughter, Breea, were make-believe. But on November 20th, 2000, just a day before, 3 masked men broke in.
She calls me, Mom, there's somebody outside the window. I looked out there, I didn't see anything, I didn't see anybody, so I just brushed it off.
Michelle had chalked it up to her child's imagination, but this time was different.
She saw them looking through the window. They were there the night before.
The same men now held Michelle and Breea at gunpoint in the living room. The gunmen said they'd been following the 35-year-old bank manager for months.
It was very much that mind control thing that they were doing, that we know everything about you.
Michelle would recount the events inside the house for investigators.
We're going to be here all night with you to make sure you know exactly what you're going to do or you will die.
Throughout the night, the ringleader gave specific instructions about how he wanted Michelle to rob her own bank the next morning.
We're going to go over this again. This is what you're going to do. When Brinks gets there, you're going to get Brinks' money.
As she huddled with Breea on the couch, now duct-taped, Michelle could hear him talking to a woman on a two-way radio.
Money 1 to money 2 were
That's
their...
what they called each other?
Yeah, they called each other money 1 to money 2.
Money 1 was the ringleader. Around 11, the voice on the walkie-talkie got his attention.
Car coming up the driveway, the roommate's there.
It was their roommate, Kimbra.
And they put the gun right here in her face, right up her nose, and said, don't make us use this. I pushed the guy's hand out of her face and said, don't do this, don't hurt her. And he just pointed it right at me and said, don't ever touch me again.
Michelle realized this might be the last night she ever spent with her daughter.
It was almost morning. I just rubbed her hair so she could try to get some sleep.
Wondering if that was gonna be the last time I was gonna get to touch her hair and see her sleep was pretty tough.
In the morning, the nightmare would continue.
It was like 6 a.m. He said, get up, it's time to get ready for work.
I got dressed and started doing my hair when he came in and stopped me and said, we need to put the dynamite on you now.
Michelle, her roommate Kimbra, and Breea would all be strapped with dynamite. Then Money 1 showed Michelle what looked like a doorbell.
This is a detonation device.
One false move, I push this button.
You will disintegrate, your daughter will go first.
And they sat me right here and said, now we're going to take your daughter.
The gunman put Breea in her bedroom closet.
I was just telling her I'd be right back, that everything's going to be fine.
Be brave, Mommy. That was the last thing she said before I walked out to go to the bank.
Did you feel brave?
No.
As 2 of the gunmen stayed in the house, Money 1 handed Michelle a briefcase stuffed with a duffel bag before he crouched in the back of her Jeep. With dynamite on her back and a gun to her side, she drove to work.
So you pull up into your spot. What does he tell you before you get out of the car?
Don't this up.
And the Brinks truck came at 8:50?
I believe right around 8:50 was the drop right over here.
That's when Michelle grabbed her briefcase and headed to the vault.
I brought my teller in the vault with me and said, I'm getting ready to clear out this vault, or my daughter and I are gonna die. This is what's happened all night.
And you whispered to her, I have dynamite on my back?
Yeah. I whispered, I pulled my shirt up.
And then you just opened up the duffel bag and started shoveling in money?
I did. My heart was racing. Am I fast enough?
Michelle's colleagues would alert the authorities, but not before she walked out with $360,000.
Just get to the Jeep, hurl it in the Jeep,
and go.
And just do what's next.
Money One directed Michelle to get out a few blocks later.
And that I would find my Jeep down the street.
She found her car and raced home.
I don't know if Breea's gonna be there. I don't know if she's gonna be alive when I get there. And I went to open the door and I was just screaming and hello, hello. It was eerily silent.
And I just heard Breea and I remember screaming, we're back here, we're back here.
Breea was still in the closet, right where Michelle left her.
What was that like to hear and see her?
Oh my gosh. She was alive. I did it. We did it. We didn't die.
Probably the happiest moment of my life. But then I could still see the panic on her face.
The dynamite's still on me.
Before leaving, the gunmen had ripped the dynamite off of Kimbra and Breea, so they cut it off of Michelle's back before running to the nearest neighbor.
I opened the gate, went down the hill real fast, helped them up to the house.
Rick Brown lived up a steep hill.
I called 911 right away.
Sheriff's number, can I help you?
Yes, some neighbors of ours were held hostage. I need somebody out here right away.
Soon, the place was crawling with investigators from the FBI, San Diego Sheriff's Department, and the bomb squad.
This is the dynamite that was taken off of Michelle.
San Diego prosecutor Tom Manning would lead the task force investigating the case. They quickly figured out the dynamite was fake.
They realized that it actually is 2 painted dowels or broomstick handles. But as you can see from a distance in the lighting, plus it's on your back with the stress of the situation, you're not going to take a chance that it isn't real.
But during the very real 14 hours they were held hostage, Michelle had held on to any detail that might help identify the attackers.
Remembering details is just sort of this part of my DNA about people. That was kind of my superpower.
Details like Money One's eyes.
When I turned the light on to go to the bathroom, and I saw his eyes in there, I said that those eyes were at my desk. Those eyes were at my desk today. Oh my God.
Michelle says it was a man with whom she'd had an odd encounter at the bank hours before being taken hostage.
And he sat at my desk for a really long time asking sort of the same questions over and over. And then a woman walked in and said, Chris, we need to get going. And they got up and left.
The man had handed Michelle his business card.
And the name on the business card was?
Christopher Butler.
After hours of police questioning, Michelle and Breea were sent to a hotel. Michelle called her brother Dave.
It didn't sound like her. It was someone, heavily traumatized.
Dave, who lived 3 hours away, rushed to his sister's aid.
What I saw when I opened that door, it scared the daylights out of me. Are you okay? And she would shake.
How about Breea?
Same thing.
In the days ahead, Michelle struggled to hold it together for her daughter.
She was the strongest person for me.
While investigators wanted answers. They grilled her about that odd encounter with Christopher Butler.
Why was he in the bank? What was he saying he was there for?
He came in to say that he was a potential client and that he wanted to talk about investments.
Before Butler handed Michelle his business card, a woman he introduced as Lisa came in and whisked him away.
Hey, Chris, we need to go.
It was the same voice Michelle says she heard later that night on the walkie-talkie.
I kept saying it over and over.
Check my desk,
Check
get that
my
card.
desk, get that card. I know that it's them.
Through that card, they started the investigation.
The FBI soon discovered Butler was a convicted felon with a history of robbing banks.
They figured out where he was staying, and then the team that I worked with set up surveillance.
Butler and his fiancée, Lisa Ramirez, lived in a house just a few miles from the bank.
Some of the people in the house were telling the police who was there when they planned it.
Within days, detectives identified the two other men. Christopher Huggins.
He was a big guy, maybe 6'4". He's gang ties.
And the man who'd held a gun to little Breea, a gang member called Bones. Real name, Robert Ortiz.
Ortiz was a connection who got the guns.
On December 1st, they decided to arrest Butler and Ramirez during a traffic stop.
In the glove compartment was a weapon. It's actually a BB gun. If you look at that in a stressful situation, that looks as real as it can get.
What'd they find when they pumped the trunk?
Plethora of evidence.
All this?
All this. They found the black bag that Michelle described the money being carried in, several pairs of black gloves, and a homemade ski mask.
Oh yeah, look at the eye holes there.
Yeah.
That they clearly cut themselves.
Michelle's credit cards were all found in the trunk of the vehicle. And then, of course, the money straps from the bank.
Also in the trunk, that doorbell detonator. And there was even more at the house.
They found all the ingredients to make the fake bomb. There were broom handles, which were cut up into small dowels, which actually were used in making the fake dynamite. They also recovered the actual spray cans. Ramirez's fingerprint was on one of those cans. It was crazy. I've never seen that much physical evidence left at a crime scene.
They thought they'd gotten away with it.
Yeah.
One thing investigators didn't find on Butler and Ramirez, any of the bank's $360,000. But after arresting Huggins that same day, they did recover $93,000 of the cash that he'd stashed away. Huggins confessed and said that he'd already spent several grand on a trip to Vegas. The fourth suspect, Robert Ortiz, was on the lam.
When authorities arrested him 3 months later in Wisconsin, Ortiz still had $32,000 of the bank's money and gave a full confession.
Did Huggins and Ortiz's confessions corroborate each other?
Yes, very much so.
So did Huggins and Ortiz's confessions corroborate what Michelle had told investigators?
Yes, almost identical.
Butler denied everything, even when confronted with direct evidence. His thumbprint on the fake dynamite sticks.
And we got fingerprints that are yours that went you to the bank robbery. I doubt that because I wasn't involved in anybody.
He tried to protect Lisa.
Lisa wouldn't have been involved with that.
But Lisa was about to start talking. She admitted she was the female voice on the walkie-talkie. She even took credit for the idea to use fake dynamite and kidnap the bank manager.
Honestly, whose idea that was about 8 months ago. Jokingly, mine.
Lisa said they'd split the money 3 ways, but that her and Butler's share, more than $100,000, had been stolen. And to everyone's surprise, she said Michelle was in on the plot.
Everybody thought they had told me that Michelle lady was helping them.
Walked out of that thinking, okay, Lisa's the mastermind behind all this, and is it possible Michelle's involved?
Manning says ultimately he knew Michelle was innocent.
The first time I interviewed her, she had Breea with her, and I saw that bond and relationship, and when she left, I went, she's not involved in this.
But that wouldn't be enough in court. San Diego County Sheriff's detectives Rudy Zamora, Dale Martin, and Randy Demers would have to rule Michelle out as a suspect.
Every time we pushed a button, she would react in a way a true victim should.
They recreated the dynamite packs and strapped them on Kimbra, Michelle, and Breea.
She was very upset.
And Michelle was emotional when asked to revisit the horrific details of the kidnapping.
And then I had to put her in there and they shoved the
She was shaken up. I thought she was going to have a nervous breakdown.
When Michelle did those reenactments, were her story, Kimbra's story, and Breea's story consistent?
Yes, completely consistent.
In fact, investigators couldn't find any evidence Michelle was involved. Still, they worried.
She was not our normal victim.
As they took a deep dive into Michelle's life,
What did they find out about Michelle's past?
She didn't hide anything.
including the fact that for years she had worked as a stripper.
I'm not embarrassed or ashamed by any of that.
Michelle says it was one of the choices she had to make for survival at a young age.
I ran away at 15. I worked really, really hard to get to where I was.
With no high school diploma, she had climbed the corporate ladder all the way to regional vice president before taking the bank manager job to be home more with Breea.
And while you were working at the bank, you were still dancing, still stripping for a while?
I was for a while. The money was really great.
But more worrisome were things that went directly to Michelle's credibility.
She falsified resumes, claimed she had various experience, various education, which she didn't have.
Bounced a check, filed for bankruptcy.
Right.
That doesn't look good.
It doesn't look good. And if you're a defense attorney, you're licking your chops.
Oh, the best verdict I ever got in my life.
See what evidence investigators found in the kidnapping of Michelle Renee at 48hours.com.
By spring of 2001, the suspects were in custody awaiting trial for kidnapping and bank robbery charges. But Michelle and Breea were still reeling from that night of terror.
I could still hear them. I could still hear the sounds. I couldn't get it to turn off.
I just wanted to hide. I thought they were gonna find us. They were gonna kill us still.
In June, Michelle decided to move Breea to Alaska to live with her grandmother.
I was gonna fly her up there and get her to safety. I was gonna figure out what to do from there.
After a few days, Michelle says she had an epiphany.
To go back to San Diego and get rid of everything I could possibly get rid of and drive back to Alaska.
With a dog,
Come here.
some cash,
Can do this on a budget.
and a camcorder,
Today is July the 6th.
she embarked on a 9-day drive
I'm on my way, baby doll.
to the last frontier.
You had a deadline.
I had a deadline. Brea's birthday was in 9 days, and I promised her I'd be back before her birthday party.
That's when Michelle and Breea say they began to heal.
Did you feel safe in Alaska?
Safer. I could be a kid again.
Happy birthday to you.
By the time they returned to San Diego a year later for the trial, Michelle says she was ready.
There was so much evidence, there was no way. I thought that this trial was going to be anything but slam dunk.
Butler and Ramirez would be tried first.
When her case came across your desk, what did you think at first?
She's guilty.
You thought she's guilty?
Well, yeah.
Herb Weston, who represented Lisa Ramirez, had a problem. His client had confessed on camera.
There was a female voice that came all at once, all the time.
That was good.
If they played that tape, saying that she wasn't involved would have been difficult.
Weston proposed a plea deal, hoping to save Ramirez from a potential life sentence, but the prosecution turned him down.
We thought we would definitely get the key statements in that she was involved.
But since Ramirez had also implicated Butler, the judge ruled her entire statement inadmissible.
We now can at least argue to the jury that she wasn't involved.
Without her confession, the case against Ramirez relied almost entirely on Michelle. A fact Manning was keenly aware of during his opening statement to the jury on June 3rd, 2002.
You told the jury that this case was about credibility.
Right. Michelle's background was going to be an issue. I knew there were issues, but I believed her.
And you
draw out
thought
what
the
you can.
jury would believe her.
Right.
But not if the defense had its way.
What was your strategy going into trial?
My strategy was to beat the hell out of the victim and show all these inconsistencies that the victim is saying.
It got very confrontational.
I was really, really off.
That played right into Weston's hand.
Angry witnesses don't come across as credible.
I was treated like I was the criminal.
During his cross-examination, Weston implied Michelle was lying about recognizing Lisa Ramirez's voice on the walkie-talkie.
Wait a minute, ma'am, I've looked at all this stuff. Isn't this the first time you've said that?
In fact, he pointed out, it wasn't in any of the FBI reports. But Michelle insists she told them.
I did. I 100% did.
And Manning says she identified Lisa's voice to him before taking the stand.
Does it bother you that Lisa actually admitted that that was her voice on the walkie-talkie? The
But that's not
fact
the
is,
issue.
it was Lisa.
But that's not the issue. For me, it made a great opening to attack her credibility.
Weston then grilled Michelle about bait money, the traceable bills banks keep in their vaults to trap bank robbers.
You didn't take the bait
Did not take the bait money.
Why not?
They said no funny money.
You say that's suspicious, that she must have been in on it.
Correct.
Maybe worst of all for Michelle, Weston questioned her maternal instincts.
Would a mother run to a place where her daughter was if she believes that I have a bomb on my back?
She wasn't sure whether her daughter was dead or alive. Don't you think it's possible that she wasn't thinking straight?
Sure. But also what could be true is she knew it wasn't a bomb, and so she didn't have to worry about it.
Did you feel like you were on trial?
I 100% felt like I was on trial.
I would be sitting in the front row, and all I could think about was, it's going to take me maybe 6 seconds to get from this point to the offender. That is how irate I was.
Day after day, listening to this.
Listening to this.
Is it fair to beat up the victim?
Absolutely.
While Weston hammered on every decision Michelle made that day, the attorney representing Butler went after everything else.
What was the worst thing they asked you?
About my sex life. They were trying to paint me as somebody that was irresponsible, a selfish, terrible mother that would do anything for money.
And they picked apart Michelle's finances.
She's in financial distress, and that could be the motive.
Isn't it kind of odd that we're talking about motive when we're talking about a victim?
It is. The defense in the case was to make Michelle a culprit here.
After Michelle's grueling 3-day testimony, it was Christopher Butler's turn. He protected Lisa on the stand, claiming Michelle was the mastermind and that they'd had an affair.
I was shocked.
It's almost laughable.
What was his story about how the two of you met?
From what I understand, we met in a grocery store and that I recruited him.
Butler claimed that he'd gone to Michelle's house that night with Huggins and Ortiz. He said that in the early morning hours, while smoking pot, Michelle brought up the bank robbery idea again and decided they should do it that morning.
His evidence of this, his proof of this?
Zero. If any of this were true, he would have thrown Michelle down in a heartbeat in his interview.
The jury deliberated for 5 days before finding Butler guilty of the bank robbery and Breea and Kimbra's kidnapping, but they hung 9-3 on the charges of kidnapping Michelle.
When we talked to the jurors, we discovered there was one juror who completely believed Butler, and the other 2 jurors were unsure.
And they found Lisa Ramirez not guilty on all counts.
Oh, the best verdict I ever got in my life.
Mind-boggling. The fact that it was her idea to do this to a mother and a child, and laughing and proud of it.
How involved do you think she was in this?
Very involved. The investigators kept saying she was the brains of the outfit.
So the brains of the outfit walked.
Right.
The second trial would go very differently, with Huggins and Ortiz easily convicted.
In so many of the stories that we tell, the ending is the conviction. But in your case, in a lot of ways, that's just the beginning.
How do you feel about the defense falsely claiming that Michelle was in on it? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and Twitter.
Alrighty. Is it working?
Yeah.
If you close your eyes, can you still see it?
Okay.
All of it. I can still see all of it.
Even though the men who had terrorized them were now serving multiple life sentences, Michelle and Breea would never be the same.
There's aspects of that night that are going to be with me for the rest of my life.
They were treated for post-traumatic stress disorder for over 2 years.
They had their guns.
Michelle says dealing with the break-in led to a breakthrough.
There was 2 choices. Call them monsters and stay angry and blame everything in my life on them, or I can take this other road. The best thing I could do for Breea is to be an example.
Enjoy the book.
Michelle wrote a book, which was made into a TV movie. And she and Breea went on speaking tours to discuss their experience with trauma.
A lot of people coming out of this would want to just forget about it, put it behind them. But you and your mom talked openly about it.
Yes. And I think it was the best decision for us.
We're speaking out about our experience.
I was showing people that it's not always the end-all be-all when something bad happens to you. You can come out of it stronger.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And by 2011,
she really turned the corner and started enjoying her life again.
the girl who had hidden from everything was a high school senior and competitive cheerleader.
She loved it. It was her absolute passion.
You're thriving. You're living the dream. You said you
Yes.
dreamed of this. You were
Yes.
living the dream.
I was.
Then, suddenly,
Senior year, in December, I started feeling a little off. I was dropping things.
Showed up at my work at 6 o'clock, dragging her leg, going, "Mommy, something's really wrong. Something's wrong. I don't know what's happening."
I said, "Mom, I'm really scared."
they had no idea Breea was in for the fight of her life.
We rushed her to the hospital, and they started pricking her leg, and she couldn't feel it. And her heart rate started going crazy.
Oh my gosh.
By 8 p.m. that night, I was paralyzed on my left side, couldn't talk, couldn't swallow, blind in my left eye.
We found abnormalities in the brain, is all they could tell me that night.
It almost sounds like there's that same feeling of helplessness that you had the night that you were held hostage.
Completely.
The next morning, Breea was diagnosed with an acute onset of multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system attacks its own tissues.
Based on the scans, she has tumefactive MS, which is not only rare in and of itself, but people Breea's age at 18 rarely get MS.
Breea says she was told she might never walk or talk again.
Just like that.
Just like that. 1, 2, 3, go. My life just ended again. I was 18, trying to go off to college, do cheer in college, and that was never going to happen for me.
So much of your healing had been talking, and now you couldn't talk?
No, I couldn't talk.
What's it?
Okay. I couldn't feed myself anymore.
She had to relearn all of that.
Good. But it was as if they'd been training for this for years.
Do you think in some way what happened to you when you were 7 prepared you for battling MS?
Yes, I think it made me strong enough to go through what I went through with MS.
It was, here we go again. Here we go again.
Breea would spend 6 weeks in the hospital.
2 to 3 times a day of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy.
After she could talk again, she turned to me and said, "Kidnapping was a piece of cake compared to this."
Do it again.
And just as with the kidnapping, Breea wanted to inspire others.
She wrote her college essay from her hospital room, from her wheelchair.
It is my hope that my college experience
And said, I'm going to college. I am going to be the first person in my family to graduate college, no matter what.
I now know that there is no time to waste. Life can change so suddenly.
She chronicled her journey on her Facebook page.
Breea, I love you.
She fought tooth and nail every single day for every single step she took. She walked out of the hospital.
This time it was Michelle doing the cheerleading.
Hi, Breea.
The rehab started in the hospital, but the real rehab was Michelle. Constantly on her. We're gonna do this.
It's okay, good job.
We were a total team. We just ended up going into full gear. We lived in a house with stairs.
Good, that was really good.
She couldn't do stairs anymore.
So once again, you're out of a home that you've been living in.
Yeah, and I had to become her full-time caregiver for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and rebuilding our life again.
Despite the odds.
4, 5, oh.
She made it to college.
She relapsed 3 times her first year in college and had to come home, but she did it.
She follows in her mom's footsteps.
Teaching her how to get her foot to stay on the line.
I mean, with the tenacity and the never give up philosophy that they have.
Lift your knee up, ready, go.
Breea is walking, talking proof.
So they told you you'd never walk again?
Yeah, I would never walk again, never see again, never anything like that.
And?
I would say I beat the odds.
Yet again.
Yes, exactly.
But 20 years after their world first came crashing down, they'd be faced with the unimaginable once again. Christopher Butler could be released.
It's been over 20 years. What stands out about this case in hindsight?
The victims.
From the very beginning, the case hit close to home for prosecutor Tom Manning.
The fact that there was a little girl. My daughter was the same age as Breea when this happened.
Nearly 20 years later, in June 2020, Christopher Butler was up for parole.
He's the one who lied about me.
Manning made sure he was at the hearing.
And you had a plan going in?
I did.
He saw a chance to set the record straight by asking Butler about the story he'd told on the stand.
I told Michelle if I felt it was right, I was gonna go for it.
What'd you think about that?
Go for it. Ask away.
Even though that's risky.
It's a little risky. This guy could go to the grave with these lies.
The risk paid off. Butler recanted his whole story, admitting he and Michelle never had a relationship.
How did that feel to hear that?
It's about time. I wanted everybody who ever doubted me to read this parole transcript. I want to blast it all over the internet that there was never, ever a chance that I would ever have been involved in anything like this, ever.
Breea says it's a bittersweet victory for her mom.
Feels good, but it's a little too late. You can search my mom's name and it can come up on the internet. You can't take that back.
Why does it take him so long to come clean? And it's probably because he had an opportunity to be free.
Even though Butler was unequivocal that Michelle was not involved,
he still hasn't really taken responsibility.
He blamed his old flame, Lisa Ramirez. But Butler said he was sorry for what he'd put his victims through, and even said he'd read Michelle's book more than once.
He said some of the passages in your book really got to him.
Yeah. On the road trip to Alaska, I really started to think about what it would be like to try to just understand.
Michelle says that's when she started to wonder about the people behind the masks.
This is someone's son. This is someone's brother. This is someone's grandson. What happened to them in their life that got them to the point where they thought the only option was to attack a mother and her daughter.
Do you accept Christopher Butler's apology?
I do, yeah, 1,000%. I appreciate him finally being honest after all this time. I hope he keeps digging deeper.
Yeah, I forgave him a long time ago, and I accept his apology.
But neither Breea nor Michelle want Butler released. He's already been denied parole twice. The irony isn't lost on Dave.
All he really did is free everybody else. He's held hostage with his life.
In a very weird way, I could breathe, I could exhale finally after all this time.
While they don't believe Butler has changed his ways, they feel very differently about the other two men who held them hostage.
They confessed. They take accountability for what they did, and that's a big thing.
Are you actually rooting for these guys to succeed at this point?
Yes. They were younger than what I am now. If they are doing the work, I want nothing but the best for them.
Especially Robert Ortiz.
At the sentencing, Robert Ortiz is the only one that turned around and looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." He mouthed it.
They wrote to Ortiz back in 2011 and received a reply 9 years later.
Out of respect for him, I'm not going to say everything that's in the letter. I can say that it's beautiful, it's heartfelt, and I can't wait to see where that leads.
This is the young man who held a gun to your daughter's head.
Yes. And she spoke at his parole hearing in his favor.
There's my puppy. We're road tripping.
In the meantime, Michelle has written a follow-up book.
So, we're on our way?
About the road trip that changed her point of view.
Great morning. Really great morning.
It is about healing. Just called 9 days, which is how long I was on the road to Alaska.
It is possible to forgive.
I do believe that through this terrible tragedy,
It's possible to see beauty again.
that something beautiful was meant to come about.
Woo, Alaska!
It has built these people into these incredible human beings.
And through it all, they say they wouldn't change a thing, even the kidnapping.
So if you look back at the last 20 years, what has this journey been about?
Raising a remarkable daughter. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life, is be her mom.
It seems like both of you look at this at least a tiny bit as a gift.
Yeah. I wouldn't change it. It gave us the chance to build the bond that we have today, and it's just gotten stronger. Yeah.
I'm Erin Moriarty, and this is My Life of Crime.
Listen to My Life of Crime from 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm here.
That's beautiful.
"48 Hours" presents
I've handled hundreds of firearms through the course of daily casework. The majority are handgun types. And then we see a fair amount of semi-automatic rifles and a variety of shotguns. Detectives Laren and McCarthy presented this case to the firearms unit. They had a woman who had accidentally shot her husband with a revolver.
Tell me what this gun is.
This is the same make and model of firearm that was recovered from the Duffy residence.
When I first walked in, the sun was coming through the sliding glass door. It just looked very peaceful until I walked in and saw Mr. Duffy laying on the couch.
There was a lot of blood on the carpet, and there was some blood on the wall, lots of blood. But based on what I was being told about her, middle-class, educated woman, she didn't fit the profile of a murderer. This could be an accident. She's eccentric and quirky. She gives that impression the minute you meet her.
She was very entertaining and very funny, loved to laugh. You either really, really liked Linda, or you really thought, wow, she cannot be trusted.
I've investigated well over 100 murders.
I'm sorry, Linda? Okay.
I was very anxious to hear how this accident happened.
You have to understand, Pat and I joke around a lot with each other.
She said, we have this thing that we always do. We morph into cartoon characters. And
I'm sorry, they what?
They morph into cartoon characters.
What's up, Doc? There was a Bugs Bunny cartoon with Elmer Fudd, and he does this silly little Elmer Fudd voice, no more bullets.
No more bullets. And she said she began to talk to him in her Elmer Fudd voice.
No more bullets.
And she said she wanted to impress him, and she walked over and picked the gun up.
No more bullets? No more bullets? But you told me there was no bullets in the gun.
Well, I don't believe she could have fired it in the manner she said she did.
Hand was right there.
I wanted to believe her story.
It's not a believable story.
I had that gut feeling there was something more sinister.
I'm Richard Schlesinger. Tonight on 48 Hours, the Bugs Bunny defense.
This is the matter of Linda Gwatz. She is present before the court. Both counsel are present.
7 years after she shot her husband in their suburban living room, Linda Duffy Gwatz is in a Los Angeles County court denying as strongly as she can that she is a murderess.
This was a horrible accident, and I wish and pray constantly that I could be able to take away your pain, but I can't.
This case is not a whodunit. It's more of a why'd she do it? Linda admits she shot her husband, Patrick Duffy, in 2007, but she says it was an awful and unlikely accident. She's had to convince authorities that fact can be stranger than fiction because her legal defense has featured, among other things, a cast of cartoon characters.
Here, let me see that thing.
Her lawyer has used the words of Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd to explain her actions, as he insisted she is innocent.
We're going to ask you to tell us what happened today.
Linda talked to police voluntarily and without a lawyer just hours after the shooting.
It was pointed down, and the next thing I know, his hand was right there, just laying there.
Well, let's go by the house.
Sean McCarthy and Shannon Laren have been homicide detectives for the LA County Sheriff's Department for 13 years. Forgive the cliche, but they really did think they'd pretty much seen it all.
Here's the house right here.
And then, on April 26, 2007, they got a call about a shooting at the Duffy's house in suburban Whittier.
I was gonna go shooting, and I accidentally shot him. I need your help. Okay, stay on the line with me, ma'am.
This is the couch that you saw in the living room?
Yes. Yes. Mr. Duffy was right here.
McCarthy and Laren found Patrick Duffy dead on the couch. His left hand was in his pocket.
And his right knee was being supported by a pillow. Very comfortable, relaxed.
There was blood pooled on the floor and splattered on the wall.
And it was a pretty good-sized blood puddle right in here.
Clearly, he had a gunshot wound to the head.
The couple's two teenage sons, Sean and Thomas, were at school. So Linda was the only surviving witness, and Detective Laren had a funny feeling.
It looked like he'd been sleeping on the couch and somebody walked up and shot him in his sleep.
What did you think?
I was leaning that this was an accident.
Detective McCarthy has been investigating homicide cases for about 13 years and knows how to spot even the tiniest clues. He saw very little here that made him suspicious.
Do you guys disagree frequently on cases?
I disagree with all my partners on every case.
Well, so how does that work?
I think we kind of wait until we have more information.
I wanted to hear her story.
She was very entertaining. Loved to tell stories.
Julie Prendergast has been listening to Linda's stories since they first became friends in a college music program in the 80s.
She said, well, actually, I'm from Ireland. And she started talking with what I thought was a pretty phony accent. That was my first indication that Linda was a little bit different.
Julie says Linda could be irreverent, even goofy.
I would say, Linda, I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to want to laugh, but we're in class right now, so don't laugh out loud. And it would just pop out anyway.
After they left school, Julie and Linda ended up working at the same place. And one day, Julie says, Linda called with some news.
She said, I'm so excited, I'm getting married, and I'd like you to be in my wedding.
The groom was a man Linda had met 4 years earlier, Patrick Duffy, a radio engineer, gun enthusiast, and private pilot.
She just said it was like her dream come true and she couldn't be happier.
They seemed happy as a family. They understood each other.
Patrick's sister, Catherine Hunt, says Patrick and Linda were soulmates and playmates.
They were kidding with each other, joking with each other.
We're just always just joking around with each other and being silly and having a good time.
And it was that silliness that became a cornerstone of Linda's story when she explained to police what happened the day she killed her husband.
Then I came into the family room and he was sitting on the sofa.
She said they had just come back from a doctor's appointment. Patrick had chronic circulation problems. Linda said he'd been planning to go to the shooting range. His .38, one of 3 revolvers he kept in the house, was nearby.
We keep it in this little locked box.
Linda told police she usually stayed away from the guns, but that day, she picked up the .38.
And the story got stranger as it went on.
We do this little silly thing. We always kind of relate little silly conversations to like cartoons that we've seen when we were younger and stuff. And he does this silly little Elmer Fudd voice, no more bullets.
And she claimed she said to him, no more bullets, in Elmer Fudd's voice.
No more bullets.
And she said his response was, no more bullets.
No more bullets?
She said it was a game they played all the time, and that when her husband said, no more bullets, in his Elmer Fudd voice, she took it to mean the gun was emptied, and that it was safe to try something Patrick had taught her.
She said that she then wanted to impress him by showing him she can shoot a cowboy style.
It's called fan firing, and any fan of Westerns knows it. You hold the trigger down and keep pulling back the hammer so the gun fires quickly.
Well, he told me there was no bullets in the gun.
She says once she started fan firing, she couldn't stop in time to avoid hitting her husband, who leaned into the line of fire.
And the next thing I know, his hand was right there.
The statement about the fan firing, it just didn't sound right.
But his partner, Detective Sean McCarthy, who had heard his share of crazy explanations from suspected killers, listened to that panicked 911 tape, listened to Linda's story, and concluded the story was just wacky enough to be true.
The overwhelming feeling that I got from her was she was odd at best and eccentric at worst.
After they interviewed Linda for an hour, they let her go home.
And when you left work that day, did you have in your mind that she was a suspect?
No.
His gut told him Linda was innocent, but he'd need more. He'd need science.
The muzzle of the firearm was between a distance of 1 and 7 inches from his head.
When he first studied the scene where Linda Duffy killed her husband, Detective Sean McCarthy was pretty sure it was an accident. He believed her story that she had reenacted their favorite Bugs Bunny cartoon.
No more bullets. No more bullets?
And then fan-fired the gun. And when he talked to Linda later that day,
Start with when you got up this morning.
she said nothing that made him doubt her.
It is my fault.
No, it's not your fault. It's just that we need to understand.
Laren and McCarthy were beginning to understand more about what happened inside the Duffy home, especially after they talked to the medical examiner, who had just done an autopsy on Patrick Duffy.
There was a second gunshot wound.
Linda Duffy claimed this was an accident, but she had shot her husband in the head not once, but twice. And believe it or not, even seasoned investigators can miss that kind of clue at the crime scene.
You could not see the second gunshot wound?
Well, because of dried blood and the amount of blood and coagulated blood, we weren't privy to the second gunshot wound.
What did you make of that?
Well, it certainly was a red flag.
But it was not just a red flag for McCarthy's partner, Shannon Laren. It was more like a bright red arrow pointing right at Linda Duffy.
There were so many highly improbable events that would have had to have all lined up for this to actually have been an accident. They didn't line up.
Oh. Still, Sean McCarthy was not convinced.
Why didn't you just say this has got to be murder?
Because I needed to be convinced myself that this was murder. The last thing in the world I want to do is send an innocent person to prison for the rest of their lives.
It wasn't enough for McCarthy to know what happened. He wanted to know why it happened.
We struggled to find a compelling motive. And we looked, and we looked, and we looked.
But they couldn't really find one. The Duffys seemed to be an average middle-class family living here in the LA suburbs. There was a life insurance policy on Patrick, but they'd bought that decades earlier. Plus, there was no evidence of cheating. And considering her eccentric personality, Detective McCarthy could not just dismiss Linda's story.
Okay, maybe this could have happened the way she said, because she's so quirky and eccentric.
But it was about to get a little harder for McCarthy to believe Linda's story because of Tracy Peck, the firearms expert for the sheriff's department, who was brought into the case by McCarthy and Laren. Remember, according to Linda, she fired the way they did in the movies. It is possible to do that pretty easily with the right kind of gun.
This is the kind of gun that you can fan fire, right?
Correct. So this is a single action revolver. This type of firearm is fired by cocking the hammer and pulling the trigger.
The guns they used in the cowboy movies were single action guns. You can easily keep firing quickly by pulling and releasing the hammer while the trigger is held back.
When the hammer is fanned, the cylinder will rotate with this type of gun. So it will fire the cartridges in the chambers of the cylinder as it's being fanned.
The Duffys had 2 single-action revolvers in the house, but the gun Linda used to shoot her husband was not one of them. It is a double-action revolver, and there's a big difference.
The shooter simply pulls the trigger, which accomplishes both cocking the hammer and releasing the hammer, and the gun will fire.
To rapid fire a double action revolver, the shooter has to do all sorts of things at the right time and in the right sequence.
Is this gun designed to be fired that way?
No. For the purposes of this case, I essentially invented a way in which I would conceivably fan this. And that included pulling the trigger, releasing the trigger, fanning the hammer, pulling the trigger, releasing the trigger, and fanning the hammer, but doing it pretty quickly.
And Peck says it's very hard to aim while doing all that. She says the unexpected, deafening noise of the gun and the recoil would have alarmed Linda if she didn't know the gun was loaded. According to Peck, it would have been next to impossible for Linda, who claims to be an amateur, to shoot her husband twice rapidly by accident, especially since the wounds were so close together.
I don't find it a very believable story.
I still wanted to believe her, but it clearly couldn't have gone down the way that she said that it went down.
By now, Detective McCarthy was all but certain that Patrick Duffy's death was no accident. But the two detectives felt they didn't have enough to prove it. Because of a heavy workload, it took 2 years, but in January 2009, McCarthy and Laren brought Linda back in for another chat. The video wasn't working, but you can still hear their conversation.
He showed me how to do it really fast because you got to do it like the cowboy.
Well, in the second interview, I think we were both convinced that this was a murder.
They showed her a video of Tracy Peck fan-firing the gun.
I think she was certainly surprised when we explained to her how difficult it would be. I could tell the light bulb went on in her brain, and she said, I got to at least change the story a little bit.
Linda now said she and her husband had practiced fan-firing with an unloaded revolver for years.
Like 15, 20 times.
Did you believe her this time?
No.
But the detectives wanted to give Linda one last chance to show them how she fired the gun. And they made her an unusual offer.
Meet us at the range. We'll bring an exact replica and show us that you can fire this gun in the manner that you said.
The detectives were certain Linda would not kill again, so they let her go home again and waited to hear from her about their offer. Days turned into weeks and then months, and life went on at the Homicide Bureau.
We changed partners, and when that happens, you start getting new cases, and other cases start falling to the wayside.
As the years passed, Linda might have thought she was off the hook, but her past was about to catch up with her.
The district attorney said, I'm going to file this case, and you need to go get her.
With no news for nearly 5 years, Patrick Duffy's brother John and sister Catherine Hunt thought the police had decided his death was an accident and had closed the investigation. But Catherine says she had a hard time believing what Linda told her when she called on that awful day.
She was incoherent. And I said, what happened? He was cleaning his gun, and it accidentally went off.
Linda had told the police that she had shot Patrick by accident, but later that night she told his siblings he'd shot himself.
Could you picture him having that kind of an accident?
No, absolutely not. We were raised with guns.
And we were taught to empty our weapons before even entering the house. And that was like the #1 rule.
It was hard to believe that he had done something like that.
And Catherine learned she was right the day after Pat died, when she met Linda at the funeral home.
I said, where was he shot? And she went like this, just like that. That's when it hit me that he didn't shoot himself. I said, so tell me what really happened. She said, oh, you're going to hate me, you're going to hate me, you're going to hate me. I said, no, I'm not going to hate you, but I need to know what the truth is. And I said, did you shoot my brother in the head? And she said, yes.
It was there, in the funeral home, where Catherine first heard the tale of Elmer Fudd.
Pat had told her no bullets. Like, no bullets like Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd, because they would talk in cartoon characters sometimes. She thought the gun wasn't loaded and it went off. I couldn't quite understand why she had lied. If it was an accident, it was an accident. But she had lied to us.
But the police still had to prove she had lied to them about why she shot him. Detectives had interrogated her twice and released her twice. The second time they let her go, they'd made that unusual offer to meet her at the firing range.
We even told her, it can be at your convenience.
They weren't shocked when they didn't hear back from her, and several months later, they stopped by the Duffys' house and saw a for sale sign. Her sons were home.
They said she's on her honeymoon in Italy.
2 years after the shooting, Linda Duffy was Linda Gwatz, newly married to Lawrence Gwatz, who anyone in the saxophone world knows is a world-class player.
When we Googled him, he was playing in Carnegie Hall.
And once again, when wedding bells rang, so did Julie Prendergast's phone.
She asked me would I sing in that wedding. And I said, what? Linda, I'm not coming to your wedding. Something's not right surrounding the death of Patrick.
Julie says she was uneasy with how Linda just moved on.
She dyed her hair blonde. She was wearing different style of clothes. She seemed to be walking on air, on clouds, like, oh, just as happy as can be.
A year after shooting her first husband, Linda met Gwatz online. She moved to Mississippi, where her new husband was a music professor. She was out of sight, but for detectives Laren and McCarthy, she was not out of mind.
Did you forget about this case? Was there a period of time where...
Oh, no, absolutely not.
When their workload with their new partners permitted, McCarthy and Laren each turned their attention back to Linda. They wanted to take a new look at the blood evidence with a new expert, Paul Delhauer. He studied the photos and police reports and concluded Linda had to be lying. Based on her statements, police believed Linda was claiming that she had fired quickly and from the same spot.
She moved and the relative position of the gun to the head changed.
We are standing next to the couch on which Patrick Duffy died. Delhauer said the blood evidence told him a lot, especially these tiny stains on Linda's clothing and the walls, called spatter, which he says came from the first shot.
The barrel has to be within about 3 inches of the head in order to produce the spatter.
Delhauer says the second shot created a large pool of blood on the floor in the exact spot where Linda said she was standing.
She would have been getting jets of blood hitting her.
Linda Duffy have any blood on her?
Very little.
Yeah.
Very, very little.
Police thought they now had proof that Linda was lying. She didn't have enough blood on her after the shooting to support her story. Laren and McCarthy thought they knew what really happened.
She took aim, fired one round while he was sleeping, realized he wasn't dead, comes back on target, fires the second round, and that's why they're within 2 inches of each other.
They believe Patrick's death wasn't an accident, it was an execution. By 2012, the new prosecutor assigned to the case was eager to move ahead, and police began talking to Linda's co-workers.
Boy, that was very revealing. They consistently talked about how she was so charming, but then as time went on, they started finding out that she was this compulsive liar.
And Julie Prendergast had a few stories to tell about her one-time friend's record when it comes to telling the truth.
We all have one gallbladder. Linda had hers removed 3 times. Linda just always seemed to want to have attention.
It was enough for McCarthy.
I became absolutely convinced that we need to prosecute her.
So finally, in May 2012, 5 years after Patrick Duffy's death, Detective McCarthy flew to Mississippi, where Linda and her new husband were living in a comfortable home, and she had gotten a job at the university.
You knock on the door, what's her reaction?
Her reaction was, I thought the investigation was all over.
The investigation wasn't over. McCarthy arrested Linda Duffy Gwatz for murder. And everyone was in for some surprises. It's been 6 years since Linda Duffy shot her husband to death, and she thought she was going on with her life, with a new husband, a new house, a new look, and a new town. But now she's going on trial for murder.
Tuesday, her freedom came to an end.
And Joseph Lowe is her attorney.
Unfortunately, on this particular day, she was going to play with a gun again like she's done so many times before, and she rapid fired it in the top of his head. It's a complete accident.
He'll argue that, based partly on the words of Elmer Fudd,
no more bullets.
Linda thought the .38 revolver was empty. Did you ever consider the possibility that this, what we'll call a Bugs Bunny defense, for lack of a better term, could be true?
0% chance it's true.
Deputy District Attorney Robert Villa says in 27 years on the job, he's never seen a defense rely, even partly, on a cartoon.
Bugs is having a conversation with Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd.
Watching a prosecutor parrot a bunny was a first for us, too. But an official transcript of the cartoon had to be made.
What do you know? No more bullets. And then Bugs Bunny says, no more bullets? As they're having this conversation, just as she went to fan fire the gun, he laid down and put his own head right in front of the gun. It's so ridiculous.
You know and I know that strange things do happen.
Strange things happen. This wasn't one of them. He was asleep. She shot him in the head twice.
It was that simple, open and shut?
For me, it was.
But it wasn't so simple for the jury. Over 2 weeks, they heard 3 recordings of Linda telling authorities about cartoon rabbits and cowboy fan firing. They also heard days of testimony from dueling experts about whether Linda's explanation made any sense at all. It was a lot for the jury to consider.
It was difficult, you know. For every expert, there's another one who can tell you a different story.
The defense questioned whether prosecution expert witness Paul Delhauer,
she would have been getting jets of blood hitting her,
was really an expert at all. The jurors deliberated for a day, but could not reach a verdict.
Very few of us thought the intent was there. So how do you convict somebody when it could have happened exactly the way she explained it?
With a deadlocked jury, the judge had no choice. He had to declare a mistrial.
So you will be discharged on this case.
It sends a clear message that the jury wasn't willing to convict on murder.
Were you disappointed?
I'm always disappointed when there's no verdict, because that means I have to do it again.
And roughly 1 year later, with Linda having remained in jail,
good morning, everybody.
Villa was doing it again. This time, his case will be very different.
He laid down on the couch.
Streamlined and simple.
His wife came up to him, put a gun between 1 and 7 inches from his head, and pulled the trigger. Some time went by, she pulled the trigger again.
He says the Duffy's marriage was strained, and she thought she might have to take care of her ailing husband.
She's like, I'm not going to wait on this guy for the rest of his life.
This was a premeditated and deliberate murder.
For his opening arguments, defense attorney Joseph Lowe brings his own sofa to present this as a simple case.
No motive, no intent, no crime. Pat was her best friend and she was his. One of the things they love to do is to watch cartoons together. They're kind of goofy.
But there are many aspects to this trial that are, if you will, offbeat.
One of you asked the clerk about how these cameras work. Well, they're only on me.
Judge John Toribio has a reputation for lightening the atmosphere for the jury.
I'm the star, so don't worry.
But things quickly get serious when the DA takes them back to the moment right after Linda Duffy shot her husband.
My husband was going to go shooting anyway, so he had his gun and I shot him.
It's hard to make out some of the words because she can't even talk.
The gun didn't have any bullets in it. I thought that's what he told me.
She sounds terrified and frantic to me.
Right.
What does she sound like to you?
She sounds like someone who is acting.
May I use the firearm to demonstrate?
Just aim it at the jury.
Tracy Peck tells the jury Linda had to pull the trigger on this gun twice to get 2 bullets to fire.
If I do not release the trigger, the cylinder will not advance.
The big surprise in this trial is what Prosecutor Bob Villa leaves out.
I'd ask that Peoples 1 through 35 be admitted into the evidence, and with that, I rest. I rested my case after basically 2.5 days.
Unlike the first trial, there is very little dense forensic testimony about bloodstains, and most crucially,
Your last name's Duffy?
he does not introduce Linda's taped interviews with police where she first discussed Bugs Bunny.
There was no need for Bugs Bunny.
No need unless she took the stand.
Villa has thrown defense attorney Joseph Lowe a curveball. Since the defense isn't allowed to introduce the interrogations unless the state does first, the only way jurors will hear Linda Duffy's side of the story is if she takes the stand and exposes herself to cross-examination.
Were you hoping she would take the stand?
Absolutely.
Were you ready?
Absolutely.
Lowe begins his defense with a good offense. His first witness is the detective who at first did not think Linda was a murderess.
When you're done asking your questions, you allowed Mrs. Duffy to go home.
Correct. Talking to her was very convincing to me. She was eccentric, and how could she harm anybody?
So you would not let somebody who you thought had just committed a murder go back out on the street if you had the power of arrest. Isn't that correct, sir?
Objection relevant. Sustained.
That night, I liked her. As the investigation went on, I liked her a lot less.
Lowe tries to paint a sympathetic picture of Linda.
Sir, how are you feeling right now?
A little nervous.
By calling her sons, Sean and Thomas.
She's just a very emotional, caring person. We were always really happy. They like cartoons a lot. They were always making funny jokes to each other and always poke fun at each other and stuff.
The defense has a very big decision to make. Will Linda take the stand herself?
And if she took the stand, we were going to hear all about Bugs Bunny.
Ms. Gwads, do you wish to testify?
No, sir.
Linda has decided not to take the stand, so her lawyer worries the jury will hear nothing about fan firing. And then he comes up with an idea.
So I'd like to refer the court and counsel to page 5 of the 911 transcript.
He finds a reference to it in the 911 tape prosecutors have already introduced.
A long time ago, he showed me how to pull the thing back on top of the gun and pull the trigger real fast.
So Lowe is allowed to call firearms expert Lance Martini, who says fan firing a double-action gun like Linda claims she did is not so far-fetched after all.
This can be done. It's not overly common, but it certainly can be done.
Sir, is it humanly possible to shoot more than one round in less than a second? Double action mode.
Yes, it is.
There's no way, absolutely no way it happened that way.
This was an execution.
These jurors never got to see any cartoons, but they did see one animation produced by the prosecutor. It is no laughing matter. It attempts to answer a deadly serious question. What happened to Patrick Duffy?
He's asleep watching television.
The video doesn't leave much to the imagination, although the defense in closing argument says it and the rest of the state's case are all a fantasy.
She accidentally shot her husband. It ain't right, and it's not fair to get somebody into a conviction, get somebody into a concrete tomb.
It all comes down to whether it's one word or two from the jury.
Correct.
Guilty or not guilty.
Jury's present, counsel and defendant are present, and you've reached a verdict or verdicts?
Yes.
Would you please
It's been a long road, now nearly 7 years since Patrick Duffy died, and 1 year after a jury deadlocked in his wife's first murder trial. This time, the jury comes back in just over 24 hours.
We, the jury, the above entitled action, find the defendant, Linda Doreen Gwads, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder of Patrick Albert Duffy, in violation of Section 187A.
The guilty verdict floors Linda. It hits her lawyer hard, too. For his part, the prosecutor is more relieved than anything else.
I'm pleased that I don't have to try it a third time.
You saw her the way she reacted.
Yes, I've always thought she was an actress, so that was her moment.
Honestly, that's the first time I saw her really cry.
Patrick Duffy's sister, Catherine, has waited years for this day.
She didn't get away with murdering my brother.
When it comes time to sentence Linda 3 months later, it's her last chance to address the court. And she speaks.
I wanted to let all of you know how grieved I feel. Most of all to Patrick and my beautiful son, Sean and Thomas. Because you lost such a loving, wonderful father.
Her sons try their best to ask for leniency.
If there's anything you can do to help out with my family, and that's all I can ask.
I believe she's innocent, and I will till the day I die.
Linda's second husband, Larry Gwatz, also appeals to the judge.
To assert that this was a premeditated, purposeful act, I'm sorry, it's unacceptable to me. Look at these two people, beautifully in love. Why? Because she's a wonderful human being who doesn't deserve this.
But the judge doesn't have much leeway.
In this particular instance, the law mandates 40 to life. My oath requires that I impose that.
I was like, you did this to yourself.
We found it curious that one jury could not agree on a verdict at all, and a second convicted Linda in a day. It is ironic, but in these two trials, it is apparently true that in the case against Linda Duffy Gwatz, less is more.
If I remember correctly,
We sat down with jurors from both trials to see why one jury quickly reached a verdict.
Andrew Dixon, murder in the second.
Danielle Wong, second-degree murder.
While the other never did.
Brandy Jones, not guilty.
Pamela Enriquez, murder in the second.
Where's the gun? 1 to 7 inches.
Remember, the jury that convicted Linda only heard the bare bones prosecution.
Makes this impossible to happen the way she says.
Very little about fan firing or cartoons.
They heard a lot more than you heard.
And we can only make the decision based off of the evidence that we heard.
The jurors from both trials, the ones who heard the long story and the ones who heard it made short, sat around our table and pondered. While less may be more, is it enough?
And you're putting a woman away for the rest of her life, so present everything.
I think I really have to agree with Brandy. Maybe all the evidence should be presented.
Did you know she gave an interview to the police?
Mm-mm.
Would you have liked to?
I would have loved to hear what she had to say. Would that have changed my decision? Don't know. Possibly.
If you had heard everything, you think it would have affected the deliberations?
Absolutely.
And even though they made their decision, some of the jurors who convicted Linda still have questions.
Did it bother you that they never said exactly why she did it?
Yeah, it did.
How'd you get over that?
I'm not over it. I still want to know.
When I heard the guilty verdict, I said, yay, justice is finally served.
Julie Prendergast has no doubt the second jury did the right thing by finding her former friend guilty. And she wonders how Linda's life, which was once so happy, became so tragic.
I'm sad for everyone involved. Those two boys lost their father, and now they're losing their mother. It's a tragic story in every way you can think about it.